The Polar Express story takes place in the northern latitudes of the United States. And anyone who's ever lived in that part of the United States, or in Canada, or the northern latitudes across Europe and Asia, will be aware that there's something missing from this layout. And let me zero in and show you what it is that we're missing. Zeroing in on the farmstead, can you see what's missing? Can you guess what's missing? Well, I'll tell you, it's icicles. In the wintertime, in the northern latitudes, hanging from the eaves of the barn and of the house, there would be icicles. And those aren't the only buildings. We're missing it on a few other buildings as well. So today I'm going to show you how to make icicles for an O-gauge layout. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge because in O-gauge, 1/4 of an inch equals 1 foot. So a 6-inch icicle is only 1/8 of an inch long. It's going to be a little bit tricky to get the icicles the appropriate lengths. And you know, sometimes they get longer, sometimes they get a couple of feet long. I remember icicles up to 3 and 4 feet long on the farm when I was a kid growing up in Wisconsin. But we're going to try to do some that are 6 inches, some that are a foot, some that are a couple of feet long. So it looks a little bit more realistic. They won't all be the same size. I'm going to show you how we make those icicles starting right now. To make icicles, we use a Woodland Scenics product called Water Effects. This is a little bit worn out label, but you get the idea. And we also use this piece of wax paper. Now it's important that you use wax paper because you want the realistic water effects to release once you're done making your icicles. And we start out by putting a bead of water effects across the wax paper. And it doesn't have to be real thick because we don't want these to be like too massive. So we'll start with that, and then I'm going to use a toothpick to draw the water effects down from the bead that I've created to make the actual icicles. Now we'll go down in several different places, a little bit at a time, and we'll make some of these longer and thicker than others. And we'll do that all the way across on that bead of water effects. Now this goes on, it looks pretty milky white as it goes on, but when it dries, it's going to dry clear. And that clear look will be the ice that we want it to appear as. Now icicles are not all uniform in shape, by the way. If you've ever been around a place where there were a lot of icicles hanging down in the wintertime, they're not really uniform. They're going to be different shapes, different thicknesses, and by dragging down with a toothpick, we'll hope to end up with something that looks pretty realistic. Again, icicles are a natural phenomena, and as a natural phenomena, they don't look perfect. They look uneven, they look a little ragged in some cases, but this is going to make it appear that we have icicles along the eaves of the barn and the other buildings. There. That'll do it for the first row of icicles that I'm going to do. I'm going to do additional rows of icicles, but this is going to need to dry for about 48 hours. Maybe a little less, but I'm going to give it enough time to be thoroughly dried before I try to pull it off the wax paper. And that way it'll probably hold together better and release better if I do that. Now, how do icicles form? What's causing these icicles to form on the eaves of the buildings? Well, What happens during the day is the sun is shining down on those rooftops and it's heating up the surface. That's causing the snow to melt a little bit, and the water flows down under the snow to the eaves of the building, and there it gets cooled rapidly as it goes over the edge, dripping over the edge, and it refreezes and forms icicles. And that's what we're going to be putting onto our barn and our other buildings as soon as we get them all completed. I've given the icicles adequate time to cure. This is what I used to make them, Water Effects from Woodland Scenics, and they have had over 24 hours to cure. I started to release them from the wax paper, and you can see here is the first one that I released, and these actually look pretty realistic. They're not all even, they're all not the same length, which is the way icicles are supposed to be. So I'm going to now release the other two sets of icicles that I have made here. I've got 3 in total, 3 lengths in total, and then I'm going to affix them to the barn. Now, in order to glue them to the barn, the eaves of the barn roof, I'm going to use the same product, Water Effects, and that will affix them to the eaves of the barn, and once that they're in place, that will dry from a creamy white look to a transparent or translucent look like the ones I've already got made here, and it'll essentially just kind of disappear. One of the problems that you have if you live in the northern latitudes and you have icicles forming on your eaves is what we refer to as ice dams. The water on the edge of the eaves freezes, and as that water freezes, it creates a barrier that doesn't allow any more water to run down and get off the roof. And then you have a real problem because it starts to back up under the shingles, and eventually, if your house has a ceiling made out of sheetrock, that whole ceiling can collapse into your rooms. So it's really a problem. If you live in a northern latitudes in a cold country and you have a particularly bad winter, you can have a lot of property damage from icicles and ice dams. But in the barn that we're looking at today and we're working on here, we're not going to worry about that problem. We're just going to get our icicles put in place and see how they look. So that's the next step. I'll release the other 2 sections of icicles, basically just working them off with my fingernails and a toothpick, and once I have them all off, we'll start affixing them onto the buildings. Be right back with that next step. On my Polar Express O-gauge layout, I have a north and a south. The north is where the North Pole is, which is in this direction. The south is where the village is, which is in that direction. Now, in the snow country in the north, the icicles would be thicker and longer on the north edge of the barn. And so I'm going to take my longest and thickest set of icicles and affix them here to the north edge of the barn. Now again, this Water Effects goes on looking like a thick, milky kind of a mess, but when it dries, it'll actually dry clear, translucent, and so that will work just fine for my icicles. It won't be really visible once it's dried. Now I need to make sure I've got enough of this for them to stick to, and I need to put them on fairly quickly before they have a chance to dry up on me. So I'm going to take the longest and thickest set of icicles and put those along the north edge of the barn. This is not an exact science, by the way, and if I am confusing you by making it sound like everything has to be done in just, some precise manner, I apologize for that, because it really doesn't. It is not something that has to be perfect or exact, because you can go back and you can adjust things as you need to after they're in place. Now I'm going to try to push these down a little bit so it's closer to the edge, and the icicles are hanging down. Another phenomena that you experience in the frigid north, up in the tundra of places like Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan, up into Canada, across the Dakotas, is that the wind blows. And as the wind blows, that wind will also bend the icicles to some extent. And you're going to see that if you see farms, buildings in that part of the country. You're going to see that icicles are going to be somewhat rearranged by the wind. As the water is flowing down the icicle and then refreezing, it's going to be affected by the wind. And that's what we're going to see here as we go along. And we're not going to necessarily try to make this perfect, because perfect isn't the way nature operates. There. Now we've got that in place, and I'm going to figure on coming back a little later and doing some adjusting on it as well. But we've got the first set in place, and I'm going to go ahead and do the second side of the barn. This would be the south-facing barn. And on this side, I'm going to put icicles that are a little bit shorter, because the temperature at which they're forming is going to be a little bit warmer, and some of the water is going to drip off before it has a chance to form an icicle. Now, again, there's not just one school of thought on this. There's some folks that would, in some buildings, just depending on the building and depending on what's affecting it, where you would see the longest icicles on the south side. And the icicles that we're going to use for the south side are not by any means tiny, so they're not going to look unrealistic in that respect. You'll also notice that these little strings of icicles that I've made here are not exactly the right length for the barn, but again, that's not a real problem because they very easily tear apart. I just want to get them to try to hang down as well as I can. There. Now we've got some icicles made, and there's more to do on this because there's, other sections of the barn where there would be runoff, water running off that would freeze and form icicles. There's also the cabin to do, but I'm going to pause here and let this set up completely and let it cure in place, and then we'll come back and do whatever touching up we need to do in order to make it look as realistic as we can. So that's icicles added to the buildings as you would see in the northern latitudes. And now that we've got that accomplished, at least we've got a good start at it, I'm going to have some fun and run some trains. All right, the locomotive that is connected is the Polar Express pulling the passenger train. And here it goes. You can see it coming into view as it goes through the crossing, and the crossing gate's lower. It's going to come around on that track number 2, the inside track on the lower level behind the church, past the boarding platform, and it'll continue around all the way. Once we get this all the way around the track, we'll see if we can get the Polar Express freight train to go. That's going to take a little bit of more attention to detail. There it goes underneath, so we're going to pause that one. And let's see if we could get a different locomotive connected. That should be the Polar Express freight train. So that one is sitting on the lower level over there, and let's see what happens when we try to start it up. There we go. That's on track number 1. That's the outer loop on the lower level. That Pair Marquette locomotive has got a really nice look to it. I think that's an attractive locomotive. Coming across the grade crossing, and you can get a glimpse of all of the cars that are on there. There's 2 piggyback cars, and the elf car that goes up and down. There's a presence car, and a searchlight car, a barrel loading car, a hot chocolate tank car, and then finally the caboose. And away it goes. It's going to go past the skating rink, behind the church, and it's going to go past the boarding platform and continue on its journey towards the North Pole. We'll see if we can get a view of the North Pole here coming up shortly. This is the North Pole. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and let you see it more closely. You can see the North Pole. That's that white and red striped pole there. The snowman and several of the figures from the Polar Express movie. Our Christmas tree is lit up. We've got a rock wall behind it that's finished off, stained like a real rock wall would be. And as we go back, we're going to pan down here across where the tunnel is. This is our tunnel, and the surface of the tunnel, the top of the tunnel is covered. Freight train runs through the tunnel on track number 1. And as we come over here, we're going to zoom in on the wolves. This is a wolf pack in the woods. This is in amongst some trees on a hillside overlooking the tracks. This video I focused on creating icicles to make the look more realistic on the barn. I'm going to continue that and do some more icicles on the house. That's the little cabin that's part of that farmstead, and elsewhere on the barn as well. We also had a chance to watch the trains running, and I'm going to be adding more, not more trains, but I'm going to be adding more accessories to the layout in the weeks ahead. And we'll come back with more videos as we do that. I want to say thanks for watching, and see you next time.